So last week, a topic was suggested to talk about expectations, because I was towards the end, we were getting a little bit off topic, and I was talking about my hopeful path towards going into the monastery, and expectations that were set during that path that have come back to bite me, as expectations are often wont to do. So, I think to start out, we can examine what an expectation is. So, expectations. When we wake up in the morning, what expectations do we have? We have an expectation that the sun will rise, right? How old are you? You might be 30, 40, 50, younger. Every day the sun's risen. Why would we not have an expectation that tomorrow it'll rise? Now, of course, according to science, we know that the sun has at least another 5 billion years. So, within our lifetimes, it's a pretty good expectation to expect the sun to rise for the rest of our lives, for as long as we live. However, not many other things can we expect for that to happen. Expectations are something that our mind does. We have, it's part of thinking about the future. It's part of our attachments and our aversions. When we go to a movie, maybe it's a sequel and we love the first one, and we say, oh, the sequel, we have expectations that because the first one was great, the second one's going to be good. And historically, the sequels never do as well as the originals, right? So we have expectations, and then what happens? Our expectations are let down. We have expectations. I'm going to meditate, and my meditation today is going to be very nice and very peaceful. And then when you try to meditate, what happens? Your mind does whatever it wants to do. It's almost as if your mind says, oh, you have expectations, huh? And it's like rubbing its hands, like, oh, we'll see about these expectations. Here's your expectations, and here they are going out the window, and you can't concentrate, and you can't keep track of your breath, and you have struggles and negativity because you have these expectations of what this meditation is supposed to be. And this can go very deep. This can go to the core of even human existence. Young children die. Well, we have an expectation that that's not supposed to happen. Why does that happen? Life is not supposed to be that way. And what do we say? When we say this is not supposed to be that way, what is that? That's an expectation. So based on perhaps experience, based on what we've learned, based on how we've been enculturated, growing up in a specific culture and learning from that culture, we have these expectations. And the more we grasp to these expectations, the more we will suffer. It's as simple as that. Now, I think I made a comment earlier, oh, expectations are bad, or something like that. And that can lead to an expectation of, when you have those thoughts, those mind states, you judge yourself. Oh, I shouldn't have these expectations. Why do I have these expectations? And if you've come far enough in your practice, or you've heard a good teacher talk about these kind of things, this is judgment upon yourself. And we're trying to lessen that judgment. We don't want to judge, because that in itself are expectations. Expectations go to the core of our attachments and our aversions. To give an example, to go back to what we were talking about, how this topic started, was that most of you, I don't think anybody here is new. I pretty much know everybody. So most of you all know that my path and what I'm trying to move down path is towards becoming a monk. And this has been a path that I've been moving down for 4 years. And for these 4 years, I've done a good job of not having any expectations. But as it got closer, it's quite interesting. When I was accepted to Bhavana Society in March. And it was at that point where, I was it was interesting. I was drawing down. It's hard to explain how your mind, the last couple of years, my mind has gradually, slowly kind of moved away from desiring to deal with or to think about kind of normal, everyday things. My mind has been moving towards renunciation. And it was quite interesting. So I got accepted, and they said, okay, well, tell us a date. Well, I got back to them about a week and a half later, with a date of June 1st. It gives 2 months for my work to get everything set and to go. Well, then they came back and they said, we've decided that because of things that are going on, that we're not going to accept any residents until the end of the year. And I thought, oh, such a disappointment. It was kind of weird, because I accepted it. I said, okay, well, that's fine. But then I started to realize, well, my mind has gone through this whole set of renouncing, but yet now I am quote unquote stuck back in the world for another however many months. At that point I was looking at 8 or 9 months. And it was interesting to see what to observe my mind and the process that it went through of dealing with expectations. Because I had, expecting to be able to go in, but life changes. Ajahn Chah was very famous in his words of, all is uncertain. There's a story of Ajahn Chah. In the morning, he would go to his monks and he would say, oh, how are you today? Or how are things going? And they would say, oh, today is good, or today is bad, or whatever it was that they said. He would follow up with, that is uncertain. And so, it's one of those things where I should have known. I thought to myself, life is uncertain. And it was interesting because it put me back into my place, and it taught me a valuable lesson in expectations, to the point where since that point I have just lived where I am right now, and trying to, when I think about going to the monastery, I think that is uncertain. At any time they could just say, nah, we don't even want you, if they really wanted to. So I'm trying to manage my expectations. Well, as of right now, I am officially on the list to go into the monastery on August 28th. I'm trying to push it back a week for a couple of different reasons. But I am technically on the list, because what happened, and this is part of the expectations, is interesting in that when I came back to, quote unquote, came back to the world in my mind, and I started saying, okay, well, I'm here, I have responsibilities, this is where I am right now, this is what I have to deal with, having no expectations of when I'll go in. My mind would think, almost, just this amount of months, and I'd say, nope, you never know, because you never do. All is uncertain. And I think that is a good way to kind of combat your mind when your mind comes up with expectations. If you're mindful enough to see them come up, you can say, all is uncertain, and that can help you to come back and to manage those expectations. Right? So I manage my expectations to the point where I'm back in, I didn't leave the world yet. I'm in the world. I'm doing my thing. I'm setting up events. I'm doing work, what I need to do for work. And I'm not thinking about when I might go in. So it's up to them. Whenever they want me to come in, they'll tell me. And this is a good lesson for me, because I had thought that I was doing pretty good at managing expectations before. But something like this, because the drive to renounce has been so strong in me, it allowed me to see my mind have these reactions that I really haven't had a lot of in the last couple years. So it's very good experiences in life. You could use them as a teacher, or you can fret over them, and you can suffer over them. It's up to you. But going back to expectations. So now I get a call out of the blue. Okay, we decided we're letting residents come in again, so you can come in. So now, of course, I've already set up events at my work. I've already done all of these things. So I can't just say, okay, bye, see everybody later, and leave. So now we're working on this time in the beginning of September. But expectations are something that is part of what we do. It's part of how our mind developed, and it's actually also part of how we survived as a species. We, because of certain cues, we expected that the animals would move there at this time of the year. We expected that these plants would bloom. We expected this. We expected that. We get married. We expect that we're going to have this wonderful, we're going to be like this two old people walking in the park with their hands, grasped in each other, and they're going to say, oh, we've been married for 65 years. And so we expect that our marriage is going to be like that. And what happens? Yeah, exactly. Divorce, death, separation, lots of stuff happens. Lots of stuff. What else do we expect? We expect that we'll live to a nice old age. Maybe 67, 75. Well, actually, people 60 is really not old anymore these days. But I think life expectancy is still about 74-ish. But so 70, 80. Yeah. But, so, 70, 80, 90. We expect to, we'll live to 101. And for those of you who are Americans, who's that guy, Willard Scott or whatever, that has like the 100-year-old people that come on. Daisy May is 105 years old today. So we expect that eventually we'll be on the TV because we turned 102. We have a nice long life. We will, all of our children and everybody will outlive us. Just the way it's supposed to be. Right? And then what happens? Your child dies. You die. Stuff happens. Life is, expectations are about an air of certainty in an uncertain world. Expectations are thinking about a situation and having a certainty about that. But life laughs back at that. It's like, oh, you think that's certain? Yeah, well, I'll show you how uncertain it is. It's quite an interesting phenomenon when you really look at it. You expect to die nice and peacefully in your bed at an old age. You expect to be married or whatever to forever until one of you dies. And then, of course, not short after, the other person dies. Because how could they bear to be without that person? You expect for your children to grow up how you want them to grow up, right? Parents have expectations for their children. My son is going to be this. My daughter is going to be that. And then they grow up and they're the total opposite. I saw this in my father. My father was a big sports person. He played semi-professional baseball. And he ended up with a son who was not a sports person, who could care less about sports. And I saw that growing up, I saw that did hurt him, because of the expectations of having it. Or to some people, even worse. Imagine, your son is gay. Oh my God. The expectations. Right? Who expects for their son to be gay? You expect for your son to have get married and have a boy and pass on the family name, right? But my son is gay. How is that going to happen? That's a big thing. You speak to a lot of people who have been through that experience. Their parents' acceptance is not always a given thing. And their parents' acceptance comes from managing that expectation. Well, that, my son is a separate, is a person. My son is a person in his own right. Has his own life, his own feelings, his own belief. And this is, I accept that. Like Ajahn Brahm talks about how his father told him, his father died when he was 16. And his father told him, the door of my home is always open to you. And he said that later on, many years later, he realized his father was saying the door of my heart is always open to you. So Ajahn Brahm uses that term a lot. The door of my heart is open to you. In terms of when you have sufferings, bad things happen in life, good things happen in life, whatever it is, the door of my heart is open to you. And that's another method of working with those expectations. Whatever happens in life, we will have expectations. It's just the way it is naturally. We shouldn't judge ourselves or down ourselves for having expectations. It's just the way it is. We're going to have expectations, just like we're going to have judgments. We're going to see somebody on the street, and because of various cues, we're going to say, "Oh, that person is scary," or "That person, somebody I have to avoid." Or we're going to see somebody on the street, and we're going to say, "Oh, that person has these various cues that this person is cool. I like this person." I'll give you an example. This is somebody. I'm a foster and adoptive home recruiter, right? So I'm at the movies all this weekend with a table, talking to people as they come in. And here comes this guy. It's he's an African American gentleman. Tattoos up, down, left, and right. Looking like. And if you look at him, you'd think, "Whoa, this guy looks like he's right out of the ghetto. He's in a gang, or he's gonna kill me, or this or that." And he comes up to me. He's like, "How you doing?" We strike up a conversation, and he's talking about wanting to be a foster parent, right? That's expectations, and that's the uncertainty of life ruining your expectations. You never know. Stereotypes. Yeah, stereotypes are part of that expectation. It's part of it. It all comes down to judgment. An expectation is really not. Expectation is an interesting thing, because if you really look at it, it's a product of the past and the future. An expectation is taking a situation that may occur in the future and comparing it to a similar situation that may have occurred in the past. So because of a situation that occurred in the past, you're expecting a situation that is occurring in the future to happen in a similar way. And where are you not when you're dealing with expectations? The whole time, you're not in the present moment. You're in the past and in the future, but you're never in the present. When you have full present moment awareness, there is no expectations, because there's no past and there's no future. Ajahn Brahm has a great quote. He says, "Time is created by craving." If there's no time, how can there be a past or a future or a present? It's interesting. So expectations are created by craving. When we are in that present moment mindfulness, let's see. Interesting. Well, it's just like I have been born and raised and have lived my whole life at the shore, at the ocean, 10 minutes from the ocean. And I don't like the beach. I like the mountains. That's just the way it is. Expectations and goals. That's an interesting thing. And in this kind of topic, I like to use the example of a general. The greatest generals in history have always known that no matter how hard you plan, the minute a battle happens, your plans go to hell. Right? So that is exactly this example of goals, setting goals. So there's nothing wrong with setting goals. People say, if you're always in the present moment, well, how can you have goals of the future? So you set your goals in the present moment. Right? But so there's nothing wrong with having goals. You have a family, you have a life, you want to have, you want to have another child, so you need a bigger house. There's nothing wrong with setting goals. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. What happens though, what causes the suffering, is when the expectations of reaching those goals does not occur, or the goals change, or the life situation changes, and you have to change the goals. That's where the suffering occurs. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the Buddha talking about the two arrows. Right? And this is specifically really talking about like physical pain, but it in a lot of ways it's similar. The Buddhist talks about being hit by two arrows. When you are hit by the physical arrow of pain, it is as if you got shot by an arrow and you have lots of pain. Well, you have the choice not to get hit by the second arrow. And that's the second arrow is mental suffering. Right? So you have a choice to you have no choice to accept the physical pain. The physical pain occurs. It's just like something happens in your life. You have a goal. You're saving money. You have a savings account, and then all of a sudden something happens, and you have to use your savings account, and you're set back in your goal. Right? That is something that you have no control over. That is something that you are stuck with. Your pain is something that you are stuck with. This is what it is. But you have the choice to not be struck by the second arrow, which is the physical pain, the physical things, the things that are out of your control. That's the first arrow. You're stuck with that arrow. It's in you. You're going to have to deal with it. How you deal with it determines whether that second arrow comes in. The second arrow is the arrow of mental suffering. So setting the goals and everything is fine, but when that first arrow hits, how you handle that first arrow determines if there's a second arrow, if that mental suffering occurs. So setting goals is fine. Being able to understand that all is uncertain, and that these goals might change. Something might change, that I might have to reevaluate my goals. That's the key. Going back to the general example, the greatest generals know that the plan goes to hell, and they have to adapt and overcome. That's one of the things, adapt and overcome in military circles, right? So you have to work with what you have in the moment that you have it. So that's not having expectations. It's almost like you're expecting that everything that you're going to plan is going to go to. So it's almost like expecting to not have expectations, which is kind of weird, and probably forget I even said that. But if you expect that all is uncertain and that you might have to change, then that might not be a bad expectation, because you're understanding that all is uncertain. You might have to change. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to, what do they call that? Adjust and adapt or adjust. And there's a word for that too, I think, in business circles that they use. But so that's really where that comes from. It's goals are not the same as expectations. There was I remember I took a philosophy course in college, and who was it? See, I don't remember. I was never big into philosophy, but there was one philosopher who talked about not expecting the sun. There's no reason for us to expect that the sun will rise the next morning. And I thought to myself, yeah, I like that guy. That guy's interesting. And this is before I was, became a Buddhist and all that stuff. And I said, you know what, that makes sense. I like that. There's no, because you never know. You never know what can happen. It's possible. The sun might not rise because there was a solar flare, or or what do they call that when a supernova that happened close to the Earth, and guess what? The Earth doesn't exist anymore, so the sun won't rise. So because obviously we know that the sun, there's no such thing as the sun actually rising. It's just the Earth spinning. So okay, so I think that's all I have in me for now. And I have been talking more than a half hour, so that we could, if anybody wanted to discuss anything about the topic or had questions, we can move into that point. Oh, well, it's definitely what the Buddha said, that all we know comes from our six senses, right? So us, losing the body, us dying and being without the body, yeah, that's, the sun's not gonna nothing's gonna rise. Well, maybe not nothing. Well, that's it. See, that's an interesting. I have expectations about my surgery, but it could kill me. That's an interesting thing. Yes, it is in the realm of possibility that anytime you go under, that you might not wake up, or that you might die from complications of a surgery. Right. So, in a way, it's good to have no expectations, that you don't know what can happen. But in a situation like that, what can happen? You can focus on, well, what if this? What if that? And you can become so focused on the negative possibilities that it controls your decision of going for the surgery in the first place. So in a case like that's an interesting case. I don't know if because I would say it's definitely not expectations. It's a attachment to it's a fear, really, because expectations can be out of more than just fear. But if you have, it's good to have no expectations. But on the other hand, there's a probability that the surgery will be fine, and you won't die. The probability is in your favor. It might happen that way, but I remember before I had my weight loss surgery, I did write a little thing, like, and I put it on my desk just in case I did die. Like, I wrote a little thing for my family. Did I have any fear or expectation that I was going to die? No. I was in good hands, and but the possibility's over there. I've done plenty of things in my life that there's a possibility I could die, like jump out of a plane. All these kind of things. So we don't want to have the expectation that, well, we won't die. But on the other hand, we don't want to attach ourselves to the fear and have that fear control our lives, that something negative might happen. Because that is kind of the other end of expectation, to a different degree. That there's some people that just expect that everything that's bad can happen to them. They'll say, "Oh, everything bad happens to me." Like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. His expectations. Everything bad happens to me. This is just who I am. This is all happens to me. So that's an expectation too, right? I would say almost in a case like that, if you had to have expectations, it's better to at least have positive expectations than negative. Yeah. So, and this is an interesting teaching, because if you look at so much of our lives, we have these innate expectations. For instance, we have an expectation that people are going to use their blinkers when we're driving. We have an expectation that people are not going to cut you off or do something that is going to put you in harm's way. But guess what? All that happens every day, doesn't it? Especially if you're driving in New Jersey like me. That happens all the time. And how else we wouldn't be bothered with it if we didn't have an expectation that this is how people are supposed to drive on the road. Even me, it's interesting because you think about, like, I've had insights and I've had periods where I just was able to accept, like, this is just how people are. But every once in a while, I still have these thoughts come up, and it's like, and I catch myself. I'm thinking to myself, well, why would I think any different? Why would I expect any different than this is just human nature? This is how it is. Like people, people have kind of who don't know about Buddhism and Buddhist kind of culture and countries and stuff. They have this expectation that Buddhist countries and Buddhist people are all these nice, peaceful people, and they live in harmony and all these other things. And all you have to do is look at the news and see that that's not necessarily the case. You have monks, asking governments to ban inter-religious marriages. You have monks inciting violence. You have all these things, and I have, as somebody who's a big idealist, I've always been a huge idealist, and being an idealist is probably the worst kind of expectation person that you can. I have this ideal of what a monk should be like from the suttas, from the Buddhist time. This is how a monk should be, like this. And I have this ideal, and even as me personally, I have this ideal, like, this is how I want to be. And I won't, who knows how I'll end up being as a monk, but I have these expectations that this is what I want to be. And so when I see a monk that incites violence, or a monk that does this, or a monk that does that, it brings in negativity in me. It brings in aversion. It really does. Maybe even a little bit of anger. Right? And that's expectations. Right? The same as the person who cut me off and didn't use their blinker. Well, I thought, you're supposed to, for the safety of yourself and others, you use the blinker. But guess what? People don't do it. But no matter how many times you expect that, this is New Jersey or this is people are just horrible drivers. Well, guess what? Every time it happens, you're still getting that aversion. You're still getting that anger inside. Right? Every time I see a monk behaving badly, monk's gone wild, I still have that anger inside. And it tells me I have a long way to go in my practice. I feel like I've gone a decent distance, but I have a long way to go. So that's what these expectations are a good guide. Or all of this part, all of your mind states and your thoughts and your attachments. When you're able to really observe them, they're a great guide. They show you how you're doing in your practice. Well, the interesting thing about expectations and being an idealist is that I'm reading the Vinaya, the rules for the monks, and the funny thing about the rules, monks have 227 rules. And the funny thing about these rules is that in the beginning they didn't exist. The rules came about as monks started doing bad stuff. So even back in the Buddha's time, the monks were behaving badly because it's human nature. This is how the nuns have 331, I think, something like that. But see, when you're talking about rules, a lot of the rules are like 311. Thanks, Damien. A lot of the rules are related to like how you wear your robe and and all of these kind of things. So, and of course, obviously, how you wear your robe and these kind of things are going to be different for a man than a woman. So, it's not a lot of, people kind of have these expectations or these thoughts that, the women have more rules, so that's a sexist kind of thing or this or that. But when you look at the rules, most of the rules for both bhikkhunis and bhikkhus are pretty much the same. And then the extra rules are mostly related to these kind of things. I mean, there are rules related to, are nuns equal to monks? Well, it depends on who you ask. It depends on the, it depends on who is, whose extrapolation of the 8 Garandas, the extra rules that the Buddha gave, and all of these kind of things. I actually, just very recently, I've been reading a lot about related to bhikkhunis, and the arguments about bringing bhikkhunis back, not bringing bhikkhunis back, all the extra rules and all this kind of stuff. And it's been very interesting how yes. Yeah. Well, the Buddha said, he said in the Mahaparinibbana. No, he didn't. I don't believe he said that they were not equal. But the Buddha talked about the fourfold assembly. The fourfold assembly, and he in the suttas it says, I will not leave this earth, I will not end my final body until the fourfold assembly is well established. Well established with arahants, with and awakened beings and numbers and the teaching and all that. And the fourfold assembly are bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, women and men, lay disciples. So for the Buddha, it was very important to have this fourfold assembly. Now in Theravada today, it's a little different. The fourfold assembly is near non-existent. I think one of the articles I was just reading is that they're up to about 1,000 bhikkhunis, which is not nearly enough, in my in my feelings. But they've only brought back the Bhikkhuni Sangha. 1,000 Theravada Bhikkhunis in the world. Yes, the Theravada. They started bringing back the Bhikkhuni Sangha in 1997. So it's only been a little under 20 years, something like that. Bhante Ji? Yeah, no. Bhante Ji ordained bhikkhunis. There was at one point at Bhavana Society, there were about 4 bhikkhunis and 9 bhikkhus, and this was in the 90s. This was before I was a Buddhist, and I kind of would love to see that happen again. There's something about the Fourfold Assembly. I was at the I was just during Wesek. I was at Bhavana, and to witness the ordination of the newest monastic there at Bhavana. Is a young guy who I've come to know over the past couple of years, and there were bhikkhunis there, and it was so nice to see the bhikkhunis and the bhikkhus together. It was interesting. Well, it's an interesting thing because there are a lot of, the Buddha was going against the prevailing culture at the time, and I think one of the things that somebody had brought up was that there was and Tetsun is the perfect person to be here to talk about the ancient history more than myself, but I think one of the concerns was, basically women leaving the household. You have all these Indian households, these Vedic, the Brahmin households, and women are disappearing and going out and becoming, shaven head monastics and all these kind of things. Where so there's that kind of aspect of the culture there that is interesting as well. But if you look at the actual rules, there's nothing that says that bhikkhunis, or what like maybe Ajahn Brahm did, Bhante Ji, all the people bringing back the bhikkhuni. There's nothing that's saying that what they're doing is illegal or wrong. It's mostly a cultural argument. It's very strong, and from what I gather, from what I've been reading, and also talking to Bhante Ji, in Thailand, in Sri Lanka, it's a lot more accepted than in Thailand. In Thailand, it's an uphill battle, but it's tough to have expectations. We have these expectations, and the expectations are interesting too, because we have these kind of expectations of gender equality, and it's hard not to look at something 2,500 years ago and attach our expectations and our cultural norms to something that happened 2,600 years ago. As somebody who was as a student of history, as a college major was anthropology and stuff like that, I'm able to realize 2,600 years ago was a very different world. Now I was watching a video by a bhikkhuni who was talking about, actually at the time of the Buddha there were other religious traditions that were much more egalitarian. So the Buddha might have been part of a trend back then to have a bit more egalitarian community, and of course that changed, and there's a lot of different things in the suttas that scholars now are kind of attributing to later additions And, I can't say one way or another if that's true or not. There's a lot of debate between about that. That they attribute like a lot of the extra rules and all of these kind of things that seem to be putting bhikkhunis at a lower stance than the bhikkhus as a later addition. And it might be, it might not be, I don't know. But sort of on the topic of expectations, but kind of off of it as well. Let's see. Angulimala. Quite an interesting movie, that one. I watched that. Didn't seem to be very, very close to what I've read about the story of Angulimala on in the suttas, but still an interesting movie. I'd love to see another movie like on the life story of the Buddha, but it's kind of rare. I think that there is one that I want to see that has been made, but it's only been made in Sri Lanka. It's only available in Sri Lanka, and it's there's no subtitles or anything like that. I don't remember what the name of it is, but until there's another movie made about Siddhartha, I guess Little Buddha is pretty much the the go-to movie for that. But I'd like to see a more, we know about the mythology of the Buddha's history, of the Buddha story. I'd like to see a more, how should I say, I guess, archaeologically not affected, archaeologically enhanced version, kind of like trying to get really to showing what it was really like back then and all that kind of stuff. And the suttas are a wealth of information for that. It was an interesting time back then. A lot of stuff going on. You hear about in the suttas, you hear about the kings. There's different kings, because at the time there were 16 kingdoms. And you hear about a variety of different teachers and sects and people going around and saying different things, and the Buddha interacting with the people, and it is a very interesting time, very interesting, and I'd love to see that done in a way, sort of like in a way that Buddhism is not big enough in America that it would be a Hollywood thing, so it would be done in a culturally based, so it would be done in like Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, whatever, and it would be tough to take the cultural adaptations away from what we know, directly in the suttas and archaeology and all that. But I think it would be interesting, to say the least. Old times. It's interesting, the whole gender thing, and that's all kind of off the topic. Really, I could make a whole other topic on this, but there are, I think it's something that kind of wanes in and out. You can point to ancient cultures that were more egalitarian than possibly even today. You can point to tribal cultures that are, where women are, they're ruled by women. You can point to, or at least women have the most power. There's interesting culture in China, actually, in the western parts of China. So it's very interesting. Actually, yeah, you can mention it here. Definitely, because I think I've read that. I'm not sure, but definitely, if you would like to post it, that's fine. Damien. That's definitely fine. Let me post actually what I've been reading here. Okay, here's my post. For those of you who don't know, Tessin is a teacher here as well, who does very interesting talks, right up my alley with the Pali and a lot of the ancient stuff. You know, somebody who's a student of history, I love learning about those times. I'm actually going through a video series now by Ajahn Sujato and Ajahn Brahmali, going through. They recorded it over the course of about 6 or 7 months, about a year ago, and it's all about ancient, the ancient suttas and the time of the Buddha and all that kind of stuff, and the early texts. Very interesting. Very dry for probably most other people, but but for me, very interesting. I like it. It's just like Jayantha is my Buddhist name.